The airport was alive with sound, a restless creature of rolling wheels and hurried footsteps. Voices muffled by distance and scattered by echoes. Announcements crackled overhead, their clipped syllables swallowed by the static and lost among the layered murmur of travelers, rushing to somewhere else. Neon lights hummed faintly, bleaching the polished floors and the hard plastic chairs into a kind of clinical brightness that never dimmed, never allowed shadows to soften the edges. In the middle of it all, a little girl sat very still, too small for the chair that swallowed her frame. Her legs dangled above the ground, shoes mismatched, one new, one worn, scuffed almost to gray. The hem of her pale pink dress was frayed, a thread curling loose against the hard edge of the armrest. She hugged a plush rabbit close, its once white fur dulled to beige, one of its button eyes long gone. She pressed her face into it as if the toy might breathe back, as if it could whisper comfort against the noise surrounding her. Her name was Lillian, though no one here knew it. To the world streaming past, she was only a shape, a child in a chair, waiting. But to the few who had once spoken her name with love, she was Lily, and Lily was 5 years old. Small enough still to believe in promises, big enough to feel the heavy ache of them breaking. She had been waiting for hours. At first, her heart had been strong with belief, her father's last words replaying in her mind like a song she could not stop humming. "Wait right here. I'll be back soon." He had kissed her forehead, and for a while she'd sat in her chair exactly as he had asked, chest puffed with pride for being good, for being patient. But time passed differently for a child left alone. Each minute dragged into the next, and the airport's energy, once exciting, turned into a roar that pressed against her temples. She counted the janitor's passes. First 3 times, then 6, then 10. She hummed the lullaby her mother used to sing, though her voice was scratchy, the notes thin and wavering. The sleeves of her dress slipped down her arms, leaving her chilled beneath the relentless air conditioning. The lights were too bright, the floor too hard, but exhaustion crept over her anyway. Lily's eyelids drooped until the world became a blur of movement. She dreamed of warmth, her mother's arms, the smell of cookies, the soft flicker of a fire. But the dream twisted. A doorway of light opened, and her father stepped through with a suitcase in his hand. He turned his back and closed it behind him, leaving her outside in the cold. Her body shifted in the chair, a small sound escaping her lips. "Daddy," she whispered, voice breaking in the empty air. No one heard her. The man with the briefcase walking by did not stop. The woman tugging her toddler toward a gate did not pause. A flight attendant brushed past with a cart, eyes fixed ahead. The intercom called out final boarding for a flight to Cancun. The crowd swelled, a tide of voices rising and falling, but no one came for Lily. The rabbit slipped slightly from her grasp, its stitched smile crooked as it dangled by one ear. Still, she sat. Still, she waited. Because he had said he would return, and at 5 years old, Lily believed words could hold the weight of forever. But forever was already slipping away. Nicholas Morgan did not stop for anyone. Not for the push of rushing travelers who blocked his path with overstuffed luggage. Not for the cameras that sometimes caught his sharp jawline in glossy magazines. Not even for the sting of exhaustion when board meetings dragged past midnight. His time was not measured in hours or even minutes, it was broken into seconds. Each one cataloged and sharpened like the edges of a blade. Tonight was no different. His flight plan had already been charted down to the last detail. Private lounge. Glass of water chilled to precisely his preference. Quiet call with the board before wheels up on his jet. His suit was the color of a pale, cloudless sky tailored to perfection, stitched with thread finer than most people's paychecks for a month. His phone buzzed as he walked, a board member demanding attention. He didn't answer. He rarely answered unless it mattered, and yet he slowed. It wasn't something he understood in the moment. It was instinct, like catching a flicker of movement in the corner of your eye and knowing, somehow, that you had to look. A shape, small, to still. A child in the wrong place, in the wrong posture. Amid the rushing current of humanity, this one figure was like driftwood caught in stone. Nicholas frowned. His pace faltered. The crowd flowed around him, spilling past like water around rock, annoyed at the interruption. He ignored them. He turned his head fully now, eyes narrowing, gaze cutting through the fluorescent wash of the terminal dot that dot a little girl, curled into a chair too big for her, clutching a battered rabbit with the desperation of someone holding the last thread of home. Her hair was tangled, her dress wrinkled, shoes mismatched. At her face there was something about it. Not just the childlike stillness, but something heavier. Something Nicholas recognized though he hadn't Seen it in a mirror for decades. Loneliness. Not the ordinary kind of loneliness that came from waiting, the long in a terminal, or being separated from a parent for a flight. No, this was carved deeper. This was practiced. It was the stillness of someone who had already learned that tears changed nothing, that no one came when you cried. The sight of it made something twist inside him. He tried to shake it off. There were 100 explanations. Perhaps her parents were nearby at the kiosk, distracted by coffee or tickets. Perhaps this was nothing. But his eyes, sharp and trained to recognize inefficiency, to detect fault lines in businesses before they broke, told him otherwise. He should have kept walking. He never stopped. Not for strangers, not for children, not for echoes of the past he had long buried beneath skyscrapers and bank accounts. But his feet betrayed him. He moved closer, step by step, until he was standing in front of her. Up close. The details only deepened the strangeness. Her bunny had slipped, dangling by one threadbare ear. He crouched without thinking, fingers brushing the worn fabric as he lifted it and tucked it back into her arms. Her small hands clutched it automatically, reflexive, as if in her sleep she knew better than to let go of the only thing tethering her. Nicholas froze. She stirred, lashes fluttering against her cheeks, and then slowly she blinked herself awake. For a moment, disorientation painted her expression. The airport lights burned bright in her eyes. Then her lips moved, cracked with dryness. Daddy. The single word struck him harder than he expected. A blade of memory slid between his ribs. He had been 5 once too, staring down a train platform, waiting for a man who promised he'd come back. His father's coat, disappearing into steam. The sound of wheels, the slam of doors. The knowledge assumed that he had been left behind. Nicholas swallowed against the tightness in his chest. No, he said softly, voice gentler than it had been in years. I'm not your daddy. Her eyes blue, sharp as ice, ringed with silver flecks so much like his own, watched him warily. She didn't cry. She only blinked at him, as though trying to decide if he was real. Are you waiting for someone? He asked. She nodded, small and solemn. He told me to stay here. He said he'd come back, but he's taking a long time. Nicholas glanced around the terminal, scanning faces. No one watched her. No one moved as if she belonged to them. The crowd didn't care. The world never did. His phone buzzed again, demanding attention. But he couldn't look away from her. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Asterisk. Nicholas crouched low, the polished fabric of his pale blue suit brushing the airport's scuffed tile floor. The girl's gaze fixed on him with a strange intensity, childlike, yes, but sharpened by something far older than 5 years. Those eyes, so much like his own, flickered between fear and hope, as though she couldn't decide which to trust. I'm not your daddy, he repeated, slower this time, each word carefully measured. Her small hands tightened around the rabbit, squeezing its worn body until Nicholas could almost hear the seam strain. She nodded once, hesitant, but her lips trembled. He told me to stay, he said. He said don't move. Nicholas's jaw clenched. There was no script for this. No boardroom strategy that told a man how to respond to a 5-year-old left, abandoned in a terminal. He scanned the surrounding gates again, rows of chairs filled with strangers staring at screens. Couples in hurried conversations, families corralling toddlers. But no one looked back at her. No one claimed her. Do you know where your daddy went? His voice was gentler now, almost careful. She shook her head. A strand of tangled blonde hair slipped over her cheek, and she didn't bother brushing it away. Her shoes, one too big, the other too small, tapped against the chair leg in uneven rhythm. A nervous heartbeat. Nicholas's phone buzzed in his hand again. Carter's name lit the screen. His second-in-command surely wondering why the CEO of Millionaire Airlines hadn't reached the lounge yet. Nicholas should have answered. Instead, he slid the phone back into his pocket. This was absurd. He had empires to manage, routes to finalize, numbers to balance in ways that determined the movement of thousands of lives every day. He was not a man who stopped for lost children in airports. And yet, here he was, crouched before one, unable to stand up and walk away. Are you hungry? He asked at last. Her eyes shifted, the smallest spark of uncertainty flashing through the blue. She nodded, then shook her head, as though she couldn't quite remember if hunger was what the ache in her stomach meant. Nicholas exhaled slowly. He reached into his breast pocket, pulling out a sleek leather wallet. A ridiculous gesture, he realized, as if money solved everything. He almost laughed, except her small, expectant eyes made the sound stick in his throat. Instead of cash, he stood and turned toward the nearest kiosk. He returned with a bottle of water and a small pack of crackers. Placing them on the chair beside her, she reached cautiously, fingers brushing the plastic as though half afraid it would vanish. Then she glanced up at him again, as if silently asking permission. "Go on," Nicholas said, softer now, the way she drank the water gone into gulps. As though she hadn't tasted anything fresh in hours made something cold settle in his chest. The crackers followed, crumbs scattering over her lap. Her hands trembling too much to keep them steady, Nicholas watched, unease growing sharper with each bite she took. A child who had eaten dinner recently did not devour food like this. A child whose parent planned to return did not sit so still for so long. He crouched again, lowering himself until he was level with her once more. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Lily." Her voice cracked on the second syllable, barely more than a whisper. Nicholas nodded slowly. "Lily," he repeated, as though anchoring her name into the ground between them. She blinked, wide-eyed. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifted closer, her bunny pressed between them like a fragile barrier. For the first time, she seemed less like a child waiting for someone else and more like a child deciding tentatively. Dangerously if she could trust him, Nicholas felt the weight of that decision press against him, heavier than any merger, any billion-dollar gamble he had made. Because if she chose to trust him, he knew he could never walk away. Somewhere in the distance, the intercom called another flight. Boarding. Final. But Nicholas barely heard it. His hand hovered for a moment, uncertain, before resting lightly on the armrest beside her. "It's going to be okay," he murmured, though he wasn't sure if he believed it yet. And in that instant, as Lily's small fingers brushed against his sleeve, Nicholas understood. His life, measured always in seconds and schedules, had just been thrown wildly, irrevocably off course. Nicholas rose from the chair, his height suddenly towering over the little girl, but Lily didn't flinch. Her eyes followed him, wide but steady, as though she was weighing every move he made. He slipped his phone from his pocket, thumb flying across the glass. One word, one command sent to Carter: "Find out if there are any reports of a missing child." "Terminal B now." The reply came within seconds. On it, Nicholas kept his gaze fixed on Lily while the crowd moved around them. An indifferent tide of travelers weaving through the gate announcements and impatient queues. The terminal was a place where no one belonged for long, a place of transience. But she was rooted here, alone, as if she'd been planted in the middle of chaos and left to grow still. He crouched again, knees protesting against the polished tile. "Lily, how long have you been waiting?" Her little brow furrowed. She tilted her head, the bunny slipping against her cheek. "I don't know. I was counting at first, but then I fell asleep." Nicholas's throat tightened. For a child, minutes stretched into eternities. For hours could feel like a lifetime. He scanned the space again, this time with sharper eyes. A woman tapping furiously at her laptop. A businessman barking into his phone. A mother adjusting her stroller straps. Not one of them looked up. Not one pair of eyes carried guilt or concern. If Lily had been left, she had been forgotten. Or worse, abandoned. His phone buzzed again. Carter. No reports of a missing child matching her description. No father waiting at security. Checked last 2 hours of CCTV at B gates. No one returned. Nicholas's pulse gave a single, hard thud. He typed quickly. Check departures. Anyone leave with her last name? While waiting for the response, Nicholas looked back at Lily. She was nibbling the last cracker. Her movements slow now, deliberate, as though she had realized this food was rare, worth stretching. She avoided his eyes when he studied her, but her grip on the bunny was fierce, protective. The phone vibrated again. Carter's words chilled him. One boarding under the name Thomas Gray. Manifest shows single adult ticket. Gate B14. Approximately 4 hours ago. Nicholas still. He looked at the gate sign above their heads, B1 for glowing in sterile white light. The very gate where Lily had been sitting. Her father hadn't just left her. He had boarded a plane. Alone. Nicholas closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening until the muscle pulsed in his cheek. He could still hear the echo of his own past, his father's shoes clicking against the concrete, the disappearing silhouette, the closing door. And now here it was again. History replaying itself, not on him, but on her. He forced his breathing even, aware that panic would help no one. When he looked back at Lily, she was watching him closely, as though she could read something of his thoughts in the tightness of his posture. "Where's your mother?" Nicholas asked carefully, her lips pressed together, trembling slightly. She shook her head. She went away, Daddy said. Daddy said it was just us now. Her voice cracked on the last word. She didn't cry, though her lashes flickered with the threat of it. That quiet strength made Nicholas's chest ache more than tears would have. The crowd surged again as another flight boarded. The intercom buzz was static. Nicholas leaned closer. Lily, he said, low and deliberate, would you like to come with me? Just until we find out where your family is. Her hand tightened around the rabbit, and for a heartbeat, he thought she might refuse. Then, slowly, she reached out, her tiny fingers brushing his sleeve. A fragile, tentative trust. Nicholas didn't move. He let her decide, and when her fingers finally curled around his hand, he felt something shift like the hinge of a door he hadn't realized was locked suddenly creaking open. His phone buzzed once more. Carter again, sir. There's more. That passenger Thomas Gray used a false ID, real name unknown. No trace beyond the boarding records. Nicholas's blood ran cold. Whoever had walked away from Lily hadn't just abandoned her. They had vanished. Deliberately. The rabbit-stitched smile stared up at him as he looked down at Lily's hand wrapped around his own. She had no one else, and for the first time in years, Nicholas Morgan felt his world teeter on the edge of something he couldn't control. Nicholas led Lily away from the cluster of gates. His long strides shortened to match her small, uneven steps. She clung to his hand as though it were the only solid thing in a world of strangers and noise. Her bunny dangled against her side, dragging its ear along the slick floor, collecting the dirt of countless travelers. Every glance Nicholas caught from passers-by seemed to scrape at him. Some looked curiously at the unlikely pair, others with polite indifference. But not one person stopped to ask if Lily was all right. Not one voice rose to say that child looks lost. Humanity in airports had learned to fold in on itself eyes forward, headphones in, hearts locked tight. He guided her into a quieter corner, a row of seats near a closed cafe. The lights buzzed faintly above, casting pale circles on the floor. Lily sat obediently when he gestured, folding her legs beneath her pink dress. She didn't ask questions, didn't resist. She only looked up at him, wide-eyed, as if waiting for instructions she could follow. Nicholas pulled out his phone. Carter already feeding him updates. Still no missing child report. Still no trace of the man who had boarded under a false name. It was as if Lily's father had stepped through the boarding gate and vanished into smoke. He slid the phone back into his pocket, fingers curling into a fist. The edges of memory pressed sharp against his mind. He could see a train's slick streets, a train station platform, his own small reflection staring back from the glass as his father walked away. He had been 6, too young to understand why, old enough to feel the sting of betrayal. The promise had been simple, I'll be back, and like all fragile promises, it had broken. Now here was Lily, clutching her bunny, repeating almost word for word what Nicholas once whispered to himself on nights he couldn't sleep. He said he'd come back. Nicholas sat down beside her, his expensive suit crumpling against the hard chair. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply watched her. She reminded him of a ghost, small, pale, anchored only by the weight of waiting. Lily, he said finally, his voice lower than he intended. Do you remember anything about your mother? Her shoulders hunched. She pressed her face into the rabbit's soft head, muffling her reply. She used to sing. Nicholas leaned closer. Sing what? A song. About stars. Her voice was barely audible. A thread pulled to thin. But then she got sick. Daddy said she had to go away. The words stabbed through Nicholas like ice. Children were rarely told the truth. Their worlds were wrapped in stories to soften the blow. But beneath Lily's quiet voice was knowledge, heavier than it should be. He let the silence hang, broken only by the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Then Lily whispered something that made Nicholas's breath catch. Daddy said not to tell anyone about us, that people might come take me away. Nicholas froze. His instincts, the same instincts that had made him billions, spotting fractures in markets. Before they collapsed, flared sharp. This wasn't just abandonment. It was secrecy, a cover-up, a child deliberately hidden. His phone buzzed again. Carter's message was short. Urgent, sir. There's more. The ID used to board was linked to a flagged passport. Possible fraud investigation. I recommend leaving this to authorities. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Authorities. He could see the process already. Lily shuffled into a system of strangers. Files stamped, her small voice drowned by bureaucracy. He knew what that life looked like. He had lived it. Cold beds, faces changing every few months, promises made and broken until trust became a foreign language. He looked down at her again. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even frowning. She just sat still, the rabbit tight in her arms, waiting, as if she already knew that promises shattered more often than they held. Nicholas swallowed hard, fighting the heat rising in his chest. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though it felt like he was making a vow to himself more than to her. Her small head tilted, uncertain, as if she wanted to believe him, but had learned not to. And in that quiet corner of the airport, Nicholas Morgan, man of precision, master of empires, realized he was standing at the edge of a promise he could not afford to break. The distant crackle of the intercom filled the silence like static in Nicholas's veins. Final boarding call. Passengers proceed to gate C-17. The crowd surged again, suitcases rattling across tile, voices layering into a restless hum. Nicholas stayed seated, a marble statue in the middle of it all, his gaze locked on Lily. She was slumped against the hard plastic seat, her bunny pressed against her cheek. But her eyes weren't closed. She was awake, watching, silent in that eerie way children sometimes were when they learned words couldn't change outcomes. Nicholas's phone buzzed. Carter again. Airport security en route. They were notified about the child. 5 minutes. His chest tightened. He had been expecting this, maybe even relying on it. The system will handle it, he told himself. That was what people said, wasn't it? Trust the process. Trust the system. But Nicholas remembered well what the system looked like from inside. A revolving door of temporary guardians, strangers with polite smiles and tired eyes, case files stacked higher than children's voices could reach. He remembered nights of lying awake, staring at ceilings in unfamiliar rooms, wondering if someone might change their mind and come back for him. They never had. He looked at Lily again. She had shifted, tiny knees pulled against her chest now, the bunny squeezed between them. She looked small enough to fold into a suitcase, fragile enough to vanish if someone simply stopped seeing her. The voices of his board echoed in his memory. Risk is leverage. Always calculate, never hesitate. But this wasn't numbers on a screen. This was flesh and blood, eyes the same icy blue as his own. A child carrying abandonment like a second skin. "Lily," Nicholas said quietly, leaning toward her. "Do you trust me?" Her lashes fluttered. She stared at him, the kind of stare that felt far too old for 5 years. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. At last, she gave the smallest nod, almost imperceptible. The weight of it crushed him. She had placed something in his hands without ceremony, the last fragile thread of her faith. The shuffle of heavy shoes snapped him back. Uniforms approached from the corner of the terminal to security officers scanning the area, one speaking into his radio. Carter's message had been right. They were coming for her. Nicholas rose smoothly, his expensive suit catching the light as though he had merely stood for another business negotiation. He straightened his cuffs, masking the storm brewing in his chest. The officers reached him. "Sir, we've had reports of an unattended minor. Is this the child?" Lily stiffened, her fingers digging into the fabric of his jacket, small knuckles white. Nicholas felt the tremor run through her body. She didn't cry, but her silence was louder than any wail. He hesitated. One breath, two. He could hand her over, let her be processed, cataloged, stored in the cold machinery of systems he despised. He could walk away, the way he once had no choice but to watch someone walk away from him. Or he could do something he had never done before. Break protocol. Break character. Break the very foundation of the man he had built. Nicholas's gaze hardened, though his voice was calm. "She's with me," the officer frowned. "With you?" "Yes." His reply cut like steel. "My responsibility." Lily pressed closer, almost disappearing against his side. Nicholas's hand settled gently on her shoulder, anchoring her. The officers exchanged a glance. One began scribbling on a pad. "We'll need to take statements." "Confirm." Nicholas's phone buzzed. Carter again. "Sir, you're making headlines already. Someone recognized you. Cameras are rolling." Nicholas ignored it. He ignored everything except the fragile warmth pressed into his side, the tiny hand that refused to let go. He bent slightly, lowering his voice until only Lily could hear. "Come with me." 3 words, not a command. A vow. Her fingers tightened, answering without sound. For the first time in decades, Nicholas Morgan felt the iron rails of his meticulously ordered life bend beneath his feet. Ahead was chaos. Ahead was risk. Ahead was something he couldn't calculate. And for the first time, he chose it willingly. Asterisk, the terminal had thinned to a hush. The crowds had moved on, swallowed by gates and glass doors, leaving behind only the faint hum of fluorescent lights and the echo of rolling suitcases. Fading into distance, Nicholas stood tall, Lily pressed against his side, her bunny limp between them. The officers had retreated after his declaration, though not without warning statements, reports. Verifications will follow. Their eyes lingered on him, wary, but his authority, his name, his unshakable presence had been enough to buy him time. Time. That was what Nicholas always controlled. Until tonight. Carter arrived within minutes, cutting a sharp figure in his dark suit. His expression taut with questions he dared not voice in front of Lily. He held a tablet in his hand, already glowing with data. "Sir," he said lowly, "we need to talk privately." Nicholas looked down at Lily. She had finally sagged against him, exhaustion winning the fight. Her lashes were heavy, her cheek pressed into his jacket. He smoothed the hand lightly over her tangled hair before meeting Carter's gaze. "Talk." Carter hesitated only a second, then turned the tablet so Nicholas could see. Passenger manifests, boarding logs, security feeds. One name highlighted in red, Thomas Gray, not his real identity. Carter said quietly. Interpol had flagged the ID months ago. Whoever he is, he's not just a man walking away from his child. He's tied to something bigger: fraud, smuggling. We're not sure yet, but it's deliberate. He vanished into a gate and wiped the trail behind him. Nicholas's jaw clenched. He had expected abandonment, maybe desperation, not conspiracy. Carter scrolled further. Another file opened, an old employment record. A woman's face stared up from the screen. Blonde hair, bright smile, worn thin by strain. A name beneath it, Eleanor Reeves. Nicholas's stomach dropped. He knew that name. Years ago, she had worked for one of his subsidiaries. She had been brilliant, loyal, and then she had disappeared after a scandal. Not fired, not formally dismissed, but swept away when one of Nicholas's rivals orchestrated a smear that had cost him an entire department. Eleanor Reeves, Lily's mother. Nicholas's pulse hammered as Carter continued. She never surfaced again after the fallout. Hospital records suggest she was ill. Died, maybe. Her child Lily would have been hidden, kept out of sight. And now the father. Well, whoever he is, he's made sure she has no one left. Nicholas's breath stilled in his chest. The pieces aligned with a brutal, merciless click. The girl sleeping against him wasn't random. She wasn't chance. She was fallout. A living remnant of a battle fought years ago. When Nicholas had thought casualties would stay confined to balance sheets and boardrooms, he looked down at her again. Lily shifted in her half-sleep, murmuring something he barely caught. One word. Mommy. Nicholas closed his eyes briefly, the weight of it pressing down like iron. He had built empires. He had outplayed rivals, conquered markets, turned himself into a name that carried fear and respect in equal measure. But he had never considered this the collateral damage his wars left behind. Lily wasn't just a child left behind by a careless father. She was connected to him, by his own ambition, by choices that had rippled outward until they broke her family apart. Carter's voice was low, urgent. "Sir, if this gets out, if the press learns she's tied to you, that her mother was one of ours, enough." Nicholas's voice cut sharp, silence in him. He tightened his arm around Lily's small frame. His own reflection stared back at him in the dark glass of the terminal window. The ruthless CEO, the man who never stopped, holding a child who looked too much like him, not just in her eyes, but in her silence. He knew what he had to do. For the first time in his life, the choice wasn't about profit or power. It was about promises. The kind that mattered. The kind he had needed once and never received. Nicholas bent his head, whispering into the crown of Lily's tangled hair. "I won't leave you." Her fingers twitched, curling into his jacket as if she had been waiting all along for someone to say it. The airport around them blurred into insignificance. The headlines Carter feared would come. The investigations. The scandal. None of it mattered. Not compared to the weight of the small hand clutching his, for the first time since his childhood. Nicholas Morgan understood what it meant to make a promise that could not be broken, and for the first time, he intended to keep it.